Hey everybody, it's Angie from Trips with Angie, and I'm a travel agent that travels all over the world, and I especially like cruises, all-inclusive resorts, and escorted tours. And that's what we're talking about today. We recently finished the Globus Classic Lodges and Parks of the West 10-night escorted tour from Rapid City, South Dakota to Salt Lake City, Utah. So in this video, I'm going to talk you through the itinerary we did and explain some of the pros and cons of taking an escorted tour. First of all, what is an escorted tour? Basically, it's when you and other people join together with a professional guide to visit somewhere. It can be anything from 8 to 12 people taking public transportation around Europe to a big group like I was on, 45 people in a 54-person bus traveling through the national parks. So my job as a travel agent is to help you sort through those different options to find the best fit for the vacation you have in mind. To start our tour, we flew to Rapid City, South Dakota, and this highlights one of the cons of taking an escorted tour, and that is that the itinerary and the dates are set by the tour company. You have to work your vacation around the dates and itineraries they have available, not the other way around. We decided we wanted a little extra time in Rapid City, so we added a pre-night to our tour, and I'm really glad we did. We had a lot of fun exploring Rapid City, South Dakota. They have a wonderful journey museum there that goes into the history of the plains. We also enjoyed Dinosaur Park, which is these large dinosaurs made of concrete that was left over, I believe, in the 1930s. If you haven't been there in a while, they recently redid it, and now there's a great ramp that leads all the way to the top instead of a steep staircase. We enjoyed the beer scene in Rapid City. I especially liked Woodland Republic. Now, one note throughout this whole tour to keep in mind if you decide to take it, you are at elevation. So an entire tour was over a mile high, and you want to make sure you're drinking a lot of water, you're not drinking too much alcohol, you're having some salty snacks throughout the day. We found that we were getting dehydrated very quickly. In fact, we even bought like an extra large, one of those big cups to take with us to make sure we were getting enough water throughout the day. The first night of the tour, we had a reception where we had a chance to meet our tour guide, Steve, and our other travelers. Now, this is a pro for some people. The fact that you are traveling with other people, it gives you a chance to meet like-minded folks who love travel. We enjoyed sitting around with different couples throughout the journey to talk about their travels, places they've been, some of their favorites. We met a great couple from Indiana, actually 2 couples from Indiana that we really enjoyed traveling with. So this can be a pro for a lot of folks. Now for others, it's an absolute nightmare, and I completely understand. This tour had a lot of forced socialization because many of the meals were in a group setting, and in a group setting in that you would need to sit at large tables in order to eat. Now, for some of you, that would be a no-go deal breaker, and that's why it's important to work with a travel agent to figure out how much of that is gonna happen on the tour versus how much is free time, how much is on your own. That's a really important lens to look through as you review the itinerary. How much socialization is going to be forced, and how much is it just really fun to meet people from around the country and around the world. The first morning had an early start. So one thing about these tours is there's going to be a luggage out time and a board the bus time. So we had to have our checked suitcases. So these are the suitcases that were going to go underneath the bus out in front of our room an hour before we were supposed to meet. So in the case of the first morning, we had our bags out at 7. We met to get on the bus at 8. Globus has a rotation requirement. So it means that on your seats on the bus will rotate. So you sit down the first day and get your seats. And then they gave you a little card that you put on the window to say, you know, where you were sitting. So you had your seat for the whole day. And then at night, the tour guide would move the cards around so that everybody had a chance to sit on both sides of the bus, in the front or the back of the bus. Now, my husband and I prefer the back of the bus. We like being kind of a little further removed. And to be honest, I sometimes fall asleep, and I just don't want to be sitting next to the tour guide asleep. I think it's so rude. I also run my travel business from my phone. So a lot of times I'm going to be on my phone, and other people find that very distracting. So we told the tour guide that we prefer just to sit at the back. He said, no problem. That's not a hot commodity. So we were able to keep our same seats at the back for the whole tour. But I do think it's nice that Globus has this rotation policy because that keeps people from like lining up an hour before we're supposed to leave trying to get that front seat on the bus. Our first stop was at Badlands National Park, and this highlights another pro of taking an escorted tour, and that is professional knowledge and expertise. We had a professional driver and a professional guide who was able to take us into the park, take us to some of the most scenic overlooks. It was absolutely beautiful. And another part of having that knowledge and expertise is getting to places. So throughout our tour, we would get fire warnings. There were several fires burning in different areas of Wyoming and South Dakota as we were kind of going through our tour, and we didn't have to worry about it. We would see the notification on the phone. Steve and Colin, our guide and our driver, would get together, figure out the route, figure out if smoke was going to be an issue, and take care of all of that for you. And let me tell you, that peace of mind was awesome, because I would have freaked out waking up in a strange hotel room in a place I haven't been before with a fire warning and not knowing what it meant for our route and trying to figure all that out. So that is a huge pro to me of taking an escorted tour, is having that expertise with you. The other thing Steve would do is he would show us videos of places we were going. So we had a long drive. The longest drives we would take would be an hour and a half to hour and 45 minutes. They would always build in a bathroom break with flush toilets or a scenic overlook, something where you could get off the bus and go to the bathroom every hour and a half to hour and 45 minutes. So if we were on a long stretch like that, that maybe didn't have the most scenic scenery, he would show a video about somewhere we're going, more information. We learned more about some of the memorials we were going to. We learned more about the introduction of wolves into Yellowstone. So it was a great add to the program. And that's in addition to the lectures he would give as we were going from place to place, so that when we showed up in a place, we knew so much about it. And I would have missed out on that if we had taken a road trip. It would have taken a lot of work for me to replicate that information and replicate that knowledge, especially since Steve worked in Yellowstone. He had all kinds of insider stories and information. Our time in Badlands did highlight one of the cons of being on an escorted tour, and that's I just wish we had more time. I really love the Badlands. It was one of the reasons I wanted to take this tour. I think it's an incredible landscape, and I just would have liked to drive around more. I would have liked to see more areas of the park and have more time to walk around. Because one thing I found out at the visitor center is most of the fossils they have at the visitor centers that around the park were found by visitors. So I really wanted to find a fossil. We did not have enough time for me to walk around and find a fossil. That night we headed to Custer State Park to stay at the Custer State Park Game Lodge, which was President Coolidge's summer White House, which I thought was really cool. And this highlights a pro of this tour, and that was getting access to these lodges. Many of these lodges book up a year in advance. As I said, we booked this 2 months before we were set to go. There was no way we could have replicated this itinerary on our own because the lodges were all booked up. So that is a huge plus, is having access to these lodges. They book their rooms, Globus books their rooms 2 years in advance to make sure they have access to a set inventory so that they can offer these tours. Big plus. We also took a buffalo safari, which I was super excited about. Buffalo are bison. They're the same animal, but they're called buffalo in North America and bison throughout the world. I didn't know that. So we got to get really close to a lot of the bison. It was absolutely incredible. They gave us cowboy hats and kerchiefs. Now it was kind of funny. Everybody else tied their handkerchiefs around the top like a decorative thing. And I was like, oh no. These are open Jeeps on dirt roads. Mine immediately went over my nose and mouth like I was a bank robber, and I was grateful for it. It poured rain during our expedition out to see the buffalo. People were soaking wet, but luckily it was pretty warm that day. So my husband and I were in quick dry clothes, and we dried off during the campfire dinner. So that was a great special thing to do at Custer State Park, and I'm so glad it was included in the tour. Now the next day we went to a place I don't think I would have gone to if we had planned a road trip on our own. So this is another pro of taking an escorted tour. You may go to places that you would never have thought of, that you didn't even know existed, and that was the Mammoth Site. And this was one of my favorite places we stopped. So this was an ancient swimming hole, but the sides were very slippery. So the mammoths would go there to get a drink, and if they fell in, they would be unable to claw their way back out because the sides were so slippery. So they have this huge pit where they have all of these mammoth skeletons that they're still working on some excavation around. And it's just incredible. I am so thankful to that developer who discovered this site. He was trying to build housing here, and when he came across the first mammoth bone, he shut everything down. They were able to raise money to build a building around it so you could actually visit the site as they were excavating it. I'm not sure that this would have come on my radar as we were planning a road trip, but it was absolutely one of my favorite places we stopped. Because you know I was going to be a fossil hunter now after we had gotten to the Badlands. Another stop was the Crazy Horse Memorial. Now, I had talked to a lot of friends who have been to South Dakota and asked them about Crazy Horse, and they're like, drive by, it's just a face on a mountain, it's not that big a deal, not worth a stop. Well, prior to getting to Crazy Horse Memorial, Steve showed us a video about the history of it, and it's absolutely incredible. I had no idea that this is one family's mission to build the world's largest monument to Crazy Horse. So they have the face done and they have a finger done, and they'll just continue to work on it as funding and time allows until it's finished. It was a very meaningful visit. We were able to see a musician playing a Native American flute. We were able to see some Native American dancers, learn more about the sculptor. I really, really enjoyed our time there. But this highlighted one of the problems of a bus tour, especially a bus tour with different age groups. So our tour was predominantly folks in their 70s and 80s. We're in our 40s, 50s. So there was another couple of those in their 40s, 50s. There was a granddaughter who was in her 20s, and then everybody else was in their 70s and 80s as far as we could tell. All of the other older folks somehow got it in their head that they were going to get back to the bus 10 to 15 minutes early instead of just coming back at the time the guide said. So for instance, the tour guide, whenever you get anywhere, the tour guide will say, be back on the bus ready to go at 1 p.m. Great, no problem. So my husband and I, we would get back to the bus at 12:57. Time for us to be up on the bus in our seats ready to move at 1 o'clock, but not early. And we were always the last people on the bus, but we were always on time. We'd show up at like 12:57, 3 minutes before it's time to go. And everyone's staring at us like we're late, but we're not late because you decided to show up 10 to 15 minutes early. Well, the group got their revenge because it's Custer State Park. One of the dinners was one of those group dinners I was telling you about where everyone has to sit at a group table. The group dinner was set for 6 p.m. So we showed up at 5:55 p.m. thinking we're early. Oh no, everyone was already eating their salads, and there was one spot available at a table for 4 and one spot available at a table for 7. My husband and I had to sit apart, and we just laughed because they got the last laugh. And we asked, why did you start the dinner before 6 o'clock? And they said it's because they've been sitting there for 15 minutes. So they got their revenge. So yeah, that's a con to some of the group dynamics. The next day we headed to Mount Rushmore, which of course was a highlight. I think they did a terrific job at Mount Rushmore. We had plenty of time. We were able to hear a ranger talk. We were able to really explore the visitor center, to hike around and see all the different areas. It was absolutely terrific. We also watched a video on the way there just to give us more information about Mount Rushmore. I never realized what a problem Jefferson was. Did you know Jefferson was supposed to be in a different location, but they didn't have enough sculptable rock, so they made half of his face, realized they couldn't make the lower half, moved him to the other side of Washington, and blew his face off the mountain. I had no idea. In our travels, we also visited Deadwood, and I wish we would have had a little extra time there. We had about 20 minutes and then an hour-long tour of the city. I would have really loved to explore more of the saloons, shops, different areas, but again, that's just a con of being on a group tour. We also stopped at Ucross Ranch for lunch, and this highlights just the care and attention that goes into making the itineraries. Our days were longer than they could have been when you're driving between these different areas. If you would just look at the mileage you were doing from point A to point B, it doesn't look like it should take that long, but what would normally be a 4-hour drive in a car, it's gonna take you 8 hours on the bus. They do wanna stop every hour and a half to keep the driver sharp and to make sure everyone has a chance to go to the bathroom. Those stops usually last between 20 and 30 minutes. So you do tend to have some longer days driving, but I thought they did a really good job about being thoughtful about where we stopped. So we had a great lunch at the ranch at Ucross. We also stopped at visitor centers so we could learn more things, have a cute little gift shop, have a beautiful view as we went through the different areas as we moved, from the South Dakota area into Yellowstone. We spent the night at Spearfish Lodge, which is this beautiful lodge, and it was great because Steve gave us a briefing about the different hikes in the area that we could do, which was terrific. So it's like we showed up, we knew exactly what we wanted to do. We could make the most of the time there. We also went to the Buffalo Bill Center of the West. Now this is another one of those places I'm not sure I would have included in a road trip itinerary, but it's an absolutely incredible museum. It talks about Buffalo Bill, including having this like gorgeous display or mock-up of what his camps used to look like as he would go around having his Wild West show, but it also has these incredible other museums. There's a firearm museum with one of the largest collection of firearms in the world. It has a beautiful art museum. There's even a huge bald head eagle that hangs out in the back. They had a wonderful natural history museum, and the coolest thing about the natural history museum is it takes you through the different zones. So like tundra, grasslands, that kind of thing. And we had just done those zones the day before on our drive. So it was really neat to kind of go through and have a reminder of the areas that we had come through. We had a long driving day that ended in Cody, Wyoming, which was really fun. We really enjoyed our time there. We've had a great dinner at Trailwinds and then also got to try some of the local beers. That was when the elevation really started to get to me. So I was feeling a little more tired, definitely would get dehydrated more easily. So again, on this type of tour, it's very important to check the elevation, make sure that you're drinking enough water. And then we headed to Yellowstone. Now, our bus driver told us that even in Yellowstone, they do carry oxygen, like little portable oxygen that you can buy if you are having trouble with the elevation. So that's something to keep in mind if you find yourself having some altitude related symptoms. Now Yellowstone. Now at one of the bars we went to, we sat next to a couple that had also been to Yellowstone the same time we were there. And they complained. They said Yellowstone was awful. They hated it. The parking was terrible. It was really hard to get into any of the popular areas. They hated like lining up to come in the gates each morning. They just had a lot of complaints and said that they probably would never go back unless they were doing some type of big backcountry hike. I'm not a big backcountry hiker anymore. I do have some backcountry stories in Alaska if you want to hear them, but not anymore. So I thought it was really interesting to hear all of their complaints because all of their complaints were resolved by our tour as we went through Yellowstone. We stayed inside the park. So this was a big part of this tour, was that we had reservations at the Mammoth Springs Hotel inside the park, and we had reservations at the Old Faithful Inn inside the park. So that took out that waiting to get in the park every morning. Done, no problem there. Parking. Our bus has reserved parking. So, well, there's reserved parking for buses in many of the visitor center parking lots. So while there were cars lined up on the street, or the road trying to get into the visitor center, we could go in and park. And even if we couldn't, as long as he had a place to safely get in, drop us off and get out, we could visit some of the more popular areas. The other thing was we had a guide with us that was so knowledgeable about Yellowstone. So a great example was we were getting ready to go to the Mud Pots, which is a very popular area. This was one of those places we had to use the reserved bus parking. And our guide told us those are the worst bathrooms in the park. They're outhouses and they're horrendous. About 2 miles before, there's a visitor center that no one ever goes to because not a lot of hikes start from there. And they have beautiful bathrooms, beautiful flush toilet bathrooms. So we're gonna stop there. Everyone's gonna go to the bathroom and then we're gonna continue on to the Mud Pots. Obviously, I would have never known that. And it made the experience so much better. And now staying at Old Faithful Inn and Mammoth Springs Hotel were just incredible. So Mammoth Springs, I've never heard of it, to tell you the truth. It's this incredible geothermal area where as the springs drip down, they make these beautiful, almost like frosted castle-like formations. And it was wonderful. We got to go out, we got to hike around it. There were harder, longer hikes if you wanted to do it. Since we were spending the night, you had plenty of time to do it. The hotel itself was beautiful, and a huge herd of elk hangs out in the front yard. Like, we were in our room. This is the view from our room. We were in our room watching this huge herd of elk hang out with their babies at sunset. It was absolutely incredible. Then the next night we head to Old Faithful Inn. Again, incredible. We're right there, Old Faithful. You can see it from the deck. There's a terrace attached to a bar. You can sit there and watch it. I mean, by the time we left, everyone was like, ah, El Faithos going off again. No big deal. Because one thing I didn't know, the entire area is full of geothermal features, vents, springs, geysers. Like, we got up in the morning and it was absolutely incredible. The sun was rising, it was still cold, so you got to see all of the steam coming out of all of these different geothermal areas. It was wonderful, and a moment that would be very hard to recreate on your own if you weren't staying at the Old Faithful Inn. Then we headed into the Grand Tetons. Now this was another just great example of a thoughtful itinerary planning. We stopped at the Jackson Lake Lodge for lunch, and it had incredible views of the Grand Tetons. Again, not sure if I would have picked that up as the place to stay on my own itinerary. I think we probably would have just kind of driven right through and made it to Jackson instead of stopping to have lunch along the way, but it was absolutely worth it. You had incredible views of the Grand Tetons, and the food was pretty good too. Then our last major hotel was the Rustic Inn in Jackson, which is absolutely gorgeous. Our individual rooms, they kind of look like cabins when you walk up to them. They have a little porch with the red Adirondack chairs, and then inside it looks like a regular hotel room, but it was a great location. You could walk into town. There's tons to do in Jackson. We really enjoyed our time there. And then we had a full free day where we had the chance to choose an optional excursion. We chose the Snake River rafting, which ended up being a ton of fun, beautiful, relaxing. It was a very good way to spend our morning. And that's a tip. So as we're reviewing the Escorted tour itineraries, one thing I look for is how many optional excursions are there. One, so you can have a better estimate of what the pricing is going to be, but two, that tells you how much free time there is. So if there's room for an optional excursion, that means if you opt out of that excursion, you're going to have more free time. And then lastly, we made it back to Salt Lake City for our big group dinner. The last con, I think, is going to be the price. This is obviously going to cost more than if you just hopped in your car and drove and did this on your own. Because you're paying for the bus, you're paying for the driver, you're paying for the guide. That is an incredible resource and an incredible expense. I priced everything out. So I took all the hotels we stayed at, all of the tours that were included. I added in a rental car from Rapid City to Salt Lake City, and it turned out that the tour was about $1,600 per person more expensive than if we had booked all those things ourselves. Now, I don't know that I could have booked all those things ourselves. I definitely know I could not have booked them 2 months before we left. Like, maybe if I had started planning a year out, I might have been able to book all those places, but I'm still not 100% sure. And we would have had to do the driving. So to us, that $1,600 per person was worth it, so that we could both thoroughly enjoy all of the scenery as we moved from one place to another. That my husband could take a nap while we were going from one place to another instead of having to be diligent and paying attention and navigating. So that we could get those lectures and those movies as we moved from one place to another. And so that we had this really thoughtful itinerary with someone looking out for everywhere we needed to be. Basically, I thought $1,600 per person was worth it when that fire notice showed up on my phone that I was like, oh, Stephen Collin got it. I don't have to worry about it. I don't have to figure out where these fires are and how they're gonna impact the rest of my trip. They're gonna handle it. But that's a decision for you to make if that is going to be worth it for you. So to sum it up, I think some of the pros of an escorted tour are the cons to some people. So the fact you're in a group, the fact the itinerary is set. It was so nice just to have someone figure out what we were doing every day. I mean, it was just like you show up and he's like, we're doing this, 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 and this. And you're like, sounds great. I don't have to think about it. I don't have to worry about it. We're gonna hit all the highlights. But that's not great to other people. That the itinerary is set and may include things you haven't thought of or you didn't know you liked. What do you think? Is an escorted tour right for you? Have you taken one? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear more about it. And then here's some videos of my other adventures that YouTube and I thought you might like.